Today on the 01581 Let's Talk, a conversation with State Representative Kate Donaghue. You're going to want to tune into this one. Welcome back to the 01581. I'm joined by State Representative Kate Donaghue. She represents the 19th Worcester District, and of which Westboro is included, but she's going to tell us all about that. Kate, welcome.
Hi, glad you have me.
Yeah.
The 19th Worcester District includes 5 of the 6 precincts of Westboro, 3 of the 4 precincts of Northboro, all of Southboro, and literally a neighborhood in Framingham.
Excellent, excellent. So big territory, yeah. And I think the last time you were on, we did sort of it was an introduction. Actually, it was pre the 01581. You were running for office, so congratulations.
Thank you.
You were successful, obviously. So want to cover a couple different topics today, but really first tell us about what is it like to be a state representative.
Oh, it's an absolutely amazing experience. You're one of 160 people in the legislative body in the lower chamber for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it's really interesting to see how those 160 people bring their own diverse experiences into making laws. You're part of a group, and yet you're able to accomplish things individually. As a legislator, sometimes a phone call from a legislator can just make a big difference. We can't necessarily change an outcome, but we can help cut through the red tape.
Sure. So constituent work is a big part of what you do. How, like in the scheme of kind of your time, and how much time do you personally spend on that? And it's probably different for each representative.
It's different for each person. I like to, as a person in her first term, I'm very hands-on in some of the constituent work.
Sure.
A lot of times people see it as the legislator focuses on legislation and the aide focuses on what we call casework.
Okay.
But everybody does it a little differently. I'm very hands-on in casework because, number one, I'm learning. Number two, it will make a difference when an agency gets a call from an actual elected person.
Sure.
So I've done some interesting work.
Can you give some examples of constituent work or casework that a representative might be asked to do, whether it's your own personal experience or not?
So one of the places where I was able to make a difference was I had a constituent, and her brother had been jailed. He was in his 50s. He'd never been in this kind of situation before.
Sure.
And the sister was trying to reach him. The way our prison calls are set up has its challenges.
Okay.
But but she was just saying, I know there's money in the account. You should be able to make this call.
Right.
But something's wrong. Something's wrong. The lawyer tells me he wants to talk to me, but he's never been in this experience before.
Sure.
And so I called the superintendent of the Worcester County House of Correction.
Okay.
And they said, what's the sister's name, this and that. He says, I'll call the sister first just to make sure I've got all the facts right, and then we'll see. So as soon as I get off the phone from him, I call the sister and say, hey, I just made this call. If you see a call from an unknown number, take it, take it.
Because we're so used to saying, I don't know what that is, right?
I said, if you see a call coming in, she says, oh, it's coming in right now.
Oh, wow.
And then I didn't have a timer on it, but it felt like not 5 minutes later, he's calling me back and he's saying, we figured out what the problem is. The number was just entered incorrectly. Okay. We're going to get it fixed.
Oh, great.
I call the sister back and I say, hey, they say they've got it figured out.
Yeah.
And then we started catching up because I knew her from other things as well. And she says, I'm getting the call right now.
Oh, that's great.
And so within 10 minutes of the call, something that she had been trying to get accomplished for a month
And what obviously
was
what was a
taken care
very,
of.
very stressful situation in general, and so well, that's great. So that's a great example. I know that other folks have reached out to representatives when there's some question about like maybe veteran services or benefits or who do I call. So
Yeah.
So I think the message here, I hope our viewers understand, is that you're accessible to them if they have questions, to reach out to your office.
Reach out to the office.
And we'll make sure that at the end of the
And-
show we have that information on the screen.
And an email or an email is good to have all the details.
Sure.
But phone calls are great.
Okay.
If something's urgent, we get a lot of email as legislators.
I can only imagine.
We get a lot of email.
Sure.
We get emails from our constituents. We get emails from across the state. We get emails from across the country.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
Sometimes well-intended advocates,
Sure.
suggest emails, and sometimes what ends up happening is, we literally have people who have been advocating for a bill apologize for the amount of email we've received from
Sure.
people across the country.
Sure,
which-
sure, right. Well, I know the email I get as a select board member. I can only imagine that's for one town. I can only and those emails do come from beyond Westboro, so I can only imagine what you get given your role and responsibility. So, so the other big part of your work is being a legislator. So, if you would, please. Talk a little bit about bills you've introduced or kind of what you're pursuing, and
Sure. Well, the whole legislative process is interesting. I've been involved as an advocate, and I understood it in general. But
Yep.
when you're dealing with it specifically, it's very, very different.
Yeah.
So it's something like you're sworn in on a Wednesday, and it's a big celebratory day. And then Thursday, the governor's sworn in, and it's another big celebratory day. Thursday afternoon, they start getting you set up on an email
Yeah.
account, and you get your laptop, and 2 weeks later, you need your bills filed for the next 2-year session.
Wow.
It's
That's crazy.
yeah. So.
Wow.
So it's Thursday and then Friday and then 2 weeks from that Friday.
And is it a fair assumption on my part that the supportive staff, I'm saying aides, those individuals aren't necessarily in place already to kind of know the system? I mean,
No.
you're bringing those people
So-
in typically new, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So most of
Talk about flying by the seat of your pants. Holy moly.
it is a little bit, but everybody's very supportive.
That's great.
But each first-year legislator typically gets one staff member.
Okay.
And some of my, at the State House, people who are elected the same year, we're called classmates.
Okay.
And we talk about our class.
Okay.
And so some of my classmates had been aides. And
Oh,
so
okay.
they come in with
They got
with a little bit of knowledge.
knowledge of how things work.
Sometimes legislative aides, as their bosses move on, they get a job with someone else. So some of the legislative aides came in with experience in the
Sure.
State House. We call it the building. I always find
All these
that
terms,
funny.
I love it.
The building,
Yeah.
so some of the aides already have building experience. But one of the other typical routes is you have somebody who you know who has who's loyal to you,
Sure.
and they learn with you.
Yep.
So that was the route I chose to go.
Great.
I chose a young man who I'd been mentoring since he graduated from high school. I've done a lot of work with high school students over the
Yes.
years, and he was in a program that I had started for teens. And the program was largely for high school students, but anyone who was a teenager was
Sure.
the program was open to. And so he had just graduated from high school, and the actual program was actually kind of a Teens for Warren program.
Okay. Okay.
And then the program just kept on going.
Cool.
After
That's great.
And so I was continued working with a lot of these teens from the time I started the program in 2019
Okay.
until I started as a legislator.
Okay, okay. So you have you have all this sort of pomp and circumstance. You're welcomed in. You've got the technology, and you've got 2 weeks to file legislation
for that
the
two-year
for the
session.
2-year session. Okay.
Yeah. There's a way of doing late files,
Yep.
but the system, you go through, like the
Mm-hmm.
first phase, the first two and a half weeks roughly. You
Sure.
start on the first Wednesday of January, and then it's the Friday.
Yep.
2.5 weeks later, that's the filing deadline.
Okay. Okay.
And you can file a bill yourself, or you can have somebody who files it with you.
Okay. Sort of like
So
a
you-
co-sponsor, would that be
Well,
considered? Or is that different?
It's different.
Okay, okay,
So there
all
are
right.
co-filers and co-sponsors.
Okay. Okay.
And then it's customary for a bill to be filed in the House and a companion bill to be filed in the Senate.
I
It's
understand.
not required.
I got you.
So that's sort of the main policy type legislation
Yep.
that we file,
Okay.
as opposed to like earmarks where
Mhm.
we might put in for a budget amendment.
Sure.
I had this in
That's a
front of me.
that's a different process.
That's
Yes.
a different
Yeah,
process.
yeah.
So there's the legislative process, and then there's the budget process, and then there's home rules and special legislation. So
Okay.
I actually got my first bill signed into law, which was more special legislation.
And what is that?
It was a sick leave bank bill.
Okay.
So in Massachusetts, depending on how you're employed, if you are in a position of high need, let's say you've, all of the paid medical leave, all of that, any of that kind of benefits, if you're down to nothing
Okay.
and you've got a long-term situation,
Mhm.
it literally requires an act of law for
Okay.
your employees, for your colleagues to be able to donate days to you.
Okay. Okay.
So I had a constituent who was in a very high need
Sure.
situation.
Sure. And is a high need situation, could that be a health situation?
Health,
Health
yeah.
situation? Could it be health for someone else you're caring for someone, or is it primarily for that person?
I can't speak to if you'd be eligible for a sick
Okay.
leave bank.
But primarily for your
like
oneself.
family medical
Okay.
leave.
Okay.
I can say the one case that I did, the person herself
Yep.
was,
Needed the
needed the-
additional time.
needed the
And
additional
and
time.
so is this special legislation for people that are working in a public sector or private as well?
It's just the Commonwealth.
The Commonwealth.
And
Okay.
even
okay.
within the Commonwealth, we couldn't pass legislation saying that
Yeah.
that Bose employees
Yeah.
can donate.
No, that's what
But
I
yeah.
thought, but just for,
Yeah,
for our
yeah.
viewers. So
Yeah.
it allows people to donate their time without sort of an act of Congress, so to speak.
Well,
Yeah.
well, it
Well, it
needs
took to that.
needs a legislative act.
Okay.
I think in other divisions, it's part of their union contracts
understand.
that they can have a sick leave bank.
Yep.
But in some divisions,
Okay.
the only way for this to happen is for there to be a sick leave bank.
I got you. Okay.
So I was contacted by a constituent, and she said they told me I needed to do this. I was vaguely aware of it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it was really interesting,
Interesting, the
because
process.
I got to actually see, it goes, and the speaker's office was really good in coaching
Sure.
me. Now it goes to this office. Now it goes to this office, and call the chair. Call the chair,
Yeah.
call the chair. So I'm calling the chair of
Yeah.
each different committee that it has to go through,
Wow.
saying, can you pass it on to the next step? Can you pass it on to the next
Wow.
step? And then the governor signed it into law.
That's great.
And,
Well, congratulations.
Yeah,
That's great.
Yeah, it
That's
was
great.
kind of exciting.
I know that, obviously you had a platform. Are there other bills that you're working on that you want
Yeah.
to talk about?
Sure, I have a few notes here.
Sure.
So we touched briefly on the budget process.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very proud that I, along with my legislative colleagues, Rep. Hannah Kane and Senator Mike Moore, we got $90,000 in special allocations. $45,000 for the restoration of Cedar Swamp,
Yep.
and $45,000 for security equipment for Town Hall and Senior Center.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
very excited
Yeah,
about
and that's right
those.
here in Westboro. Yes.
In
Yep,
Westboro.
absolutely. Yep.
And we had others in other communities. But in terms of the bills that I filed, as is, I don't quite want to say customary, but every legislator does things differently.
Mhm.
But as a first year, most of the legislation I filed was either co-filing it with another legislator, or or a companion bill for something happening in the Senate.
Okay.
So I did file a bill specifically for improving how the Commonwealth, the regulations around handling what we call administrative discharge. It's
Okay.
kind of an in-the-weeds thing relative to substance use disorder.
Okay.
You know, and I don't know how many of our viewers know, but I lost my son, my only
Yes.
child, to an overdose.
Right.
And I don't want to say that fighting substance use disorder is my highest priority. Education, fighting climate change, healthcare are all very important
Sure.
priorities for me.
Yep.
But fighting for people struggling with substance use disorder is where my voice is strongest.
Sure. Sure.
And it's where I have the personal stories.
Right,
So I talk about, so one of the things that I had observed when Brian was struggling, he was in a program, but was thrown out of the program for smoking a cigarette, a
Okay.
regular tobacco cigarette.
Okay.
He was smoking it in the bathroom. And in brief, the story, what happened to him, the whole trajectory of this particular part of his life was thrown out for smoking a cigarette.
Yep.
So off
Which
he
is a
goes.
legal substance, but not for that program, right? Yep.
Well,
Yep.
he was allowed to smoke outside,
Okay.
but he
Where he
was
was
smoking
smoking.
in the bathroom. He thought, the way he told the story was, the bathroom always smelled of smoke. He thought that
Sure.
they just ignored it.
Right.
And then, he's there smoking a cigarette in the bathroom, and suddenly he hears a pounding on the door. So he flushes the butt and
Yep.
feels he's safe,
Yep.
walks out, lighter goes through a hole in his Johnny pocket.
Oh boy.
Busted.
Yep. Yep.
So he's thrown out of the program, and he's with another young man who actually had graduated from the program. And they headed towards Worcester. Like many parents, I was saying, you can't just keep going into programs and then come home
Sure.
and,
Yep.
stay with us and start using again.
Yep. Yep.
So he didn't come home. And he and his friend tried to spend the night in a hospital waiting room. They had procured drugs. His friend had drugs with him. And he had spent the night in this hospital waiting room before. But this time, he had another person with him, and they attracted the attention of security.
Sure.
And they were arrested. And they put him, it was $1,000 bail. My husband and I went back and forth.
What do we do? Sure.
Some people will tell you, you've got to let them stay in jail.
Sure.
Others will tell you, no, get
Yep.
them into treatment.
Sure.
So my husband and I talked about it, and ultimately we did decide to bail him out and have him get into a program the following Monday. By
Sure.
now it's late Friday afternoon. And he spends the weekend with us. And I could just see him getting more and more depressed. And Sunday night I'm saying, Brian, we've got to do this. You don't have to do this. You can either leave home
Sure. Sure.
or go
Yeah, right.
tomorrow
But we're
morning
offering-
to
yep,
this
yep,
program.
yep.
And he wakes me up at about 2 a.m. and said, Mom, I just tried to kill myself. He says, and then, he just said, and then I got too afraid.
Yep.
I know
Yep.
the will to live is strong.
Sure.
And so he, by ambulance to UMass, 3 days in the ICU, another 8 days on a psych ward, and then he gets admitted to another program, the exact same level of treatment that he was thrown out of 2 weeks earlier.
Okay.
And I tell people, could there be a more compassionate and cost-effective way to deal with a young man who smoked a cigarette?
Right. Yeah, because he and the system
He
had
was-
to kind of go through all these other steps.
He was
to
on
kind-
Mass
yeah.
Health,
Yep,
as
yep,
a lot
sure.
of young people are.
Sure.
And I was told, I don't know how true it is, but I was told that just the cost of his ICU stay could probably have paid for a small house.
Oh, I can imagine. Sure. And he was cycled through that whole thing. I mean, I know what it's like when I go in for a doctor's appointment. I mean, let alone the complexity of his care, right? And
So
Yeah.
So life is about story.
Sure.
But it comes to a very in-the-weeds bill saying we need to do better with administrative discharge.
Okay.
And I believe that administrative discharge, when people are thrown out of programs, for showing the symptoms of the disease for which they are being treated.
Sure.
We don't throw diabetics on the street because they snuck a donut.
Yeah. No, we don't. Right. Right. Yep.
And so we,
We've always talked, Kate, about treating substance abuse for what it is. That it's not a crime. That it's not a moral failing.
Exactly.
That it is a healthcare issue. It's an illness, if that's the right word to use, and we need to treat it in the
Right.
same way. So
we have to treat the opioid epidemic like the public health
Yes.
crisis it is,
Right.
and not a moral failing.
Sure.
But people are treated differently.
Yeah. So you filed this bill.
I filed this
and
bill.
So where does this bill sit among the myriad? I know in talking with Senator Moore that process,
Yes.
the number of bills.
It's like 3 to 5% of bills
Yep.
that are filed every year get passed.
Wow.
So you file a bill. That's an example of a bill
Sure,
that I
sure.
passed.
So that's in the process.
That's in the
Okay,
process.
okay.
Another bill that I filed, interestingly, I've been active in politics for many, many
Yes,
years.
a few.
And so I've known people. I've had sitting governors, sitting U.S. senators at my home, sitting congressmen. So well known within the political structure.
Yep.
And then Brian starts struggling with substance use disorder. And there's so much stigma that I was really, really quiet about it at first. And then a good friend of mine said to me, Kate, you have a voice, use it.
Use it. Yep.
So I was gradually being more and more open about
Sure.
the fact that the language I used then was a heroin addict.
Yep.
Now I would more talk about someone struggling with substance use disorder.
Sure.
And there was a bill filed by Senator John Keenan that says that right now insurance companies are required, when it's medically necessary, to cover 14 days of inpatient substance use treatment, residential treatment. And he's filed a bill to extend that to 30 days because there's very little that you actually get done within 14 days.
Sure.
And 6 years ago, I testified on that bill for the first time. And that was the first time that a lot of my friends, I knew half of the members on the legislative panel
Sure.
hearing the bill. And I had testified at panels before.
Sure.
And I had never, I testified previously, but had never talked about my son struggling with
the
substance
personal
use
aspect of
disorder.
it, yep.
And that was the first time most of them knew about it. And so I filed bills new for myself, and I filed bills that other people have been
You've been working on it. It's amazing, right?
Right.
The
So
trajectory of
the
the bill.
bills are waiting for hearings.
Okay,
So
okay.
essentially you file bills,
Yep.
then there's a series of
Sure,
hearings,
Sure.
and then the committees act on the hearings,
Yep.
and then depending on the whole process,
Yeah.
some of them end up on the House floor for us to vote on.
Okay.
I was so
No,
interested in what we were talking about. I was losing track
Yeah,
of time.
no, we're good. We're very good on time. First of all, I want to say, thank you for sharing your story. And I've had the privilege of hearing it many times, but some of our viewers may not have. But it is incredibly courageous of you to do that as a public official, but as a mom. And so kudos to you, because through your voice, to the friend that said, use your voice, it is a powerful one, and it has meaning. And I think when we can attach ourselves to that, it's a very authentic kind of approach. So
As I
thank you.
said, there are many issues, as I
course.
said, that
Yep.
I've filed bills on, from nitty-gritty things on helping senior centers,
Sure.
just looking at all of them.
Well, Kate, one of the ones that I know you've been very active, not so much on a bill, but recently, bringing it like kind of current time, you've been very active in helping with sort of the settlement of several refugee families. Is there anything you kind of want to talk about kind
It's
of
a
that
big issue.
experience? And,
It's
yep.
been, it's been way more hands-on than I ever expected.
Right. Talk
the-
about constituent services in many
Yes.
ways, from many angles, right?
It's, the state is in a crisis.
Yeah.
It's just we were in a housing crisis, a housing emergency before,
Sure.
with just regular, fully employed families not being able to afford where they could live.
Yeah.
And a lot of evictions and a lot of...
I'm sorry, one of the things I've learned is that, because I've tried to understand kind of why now, like, so put the refugee element aside, but to your point about kind of regular families, like living here in Massachusetts, and one of those elements that was really brought to my attention was post-COVID, as many of those protections dropped around, eviction notices, that now those folks, their rents went sky high, their incomes did not, maybe their incomes haven't returned, and now you have, that's just one
piece
element of that.
But just as we're living longer, and so as people live longer, less housing turns over.
Yep.
I look at myself personally.
You've been here for a few years?
I've been here, I've been in the house on Gary Circle since '77.
Yep.
And there's not a lot of options for me to move to another home.
Sure.
I have the unusual situation of I have to stay in precincts 1, 2, 3, 4,
Yes, you do.
or 6. Somebody had said, "Oh, have you thought about like Westboro Village or something?"
Sure. Yeah.
Not in my district.
Yeah, you can't go there, not yet.
Can't go there. Carlton Gardens, nope. Right across the street. Treetop is in the district, but Carlton Gardens isn't.
Sure.
So I have that additional limitation of staying in these particular precincts.
Right. And for families, it might be I can't because I want to
sorts of
displace my
things.
kids, or or my job isn't there.
They want
Whatever
to keep
it
the
is.
kids in school.
Any number of
But
reasons.
we have a housing crisis. Families are under stress for a numbers of reasons. The whole pandemic put people in stress. So children. I'm sure you hear about the stress that it's put on children missing the years of school. So people become homeless or unhoused because of domestic violence, because of a job loss, because of a divorce. I have a friend, she became homeless to pay off her child's student debt. Yeah, so,
yeah, there's a quilt of stories.
There's a quilt of stories. I talked to a woman who's living in a hotel, and one of the issues that I'm learning about, digressing, is equity theft, where they, you might, as a select person, you might be familiar with the fact that you can sell to, not sure the correct word for it, but essentially a collection company, where they can pay off a $5,000 tax bill and take your $500,000 home. I talked to a woman who, her story was a divorce where she ended up, her words, they took everything. And then she lost her home, so she got behind on her taxes, lost her home to what we call equity theft, and she's been living in a hotel. So there are, and women particularly are more likely to have these circumstances happen to them. But so separate from the immigration crisis. So we already, before the whole asylum seekers situation blossomed. We were already, as you know, we had...
well, here in Westboro, we had about 75 families living here.
But they're hovered between 68, low 70s, but those were supported families. Right. SMOC was providing them with the basic, casework, making sure that they had their basic needs met. And then, today's Tuesday, 5 weeks ago today, I learned that there were unhoused families placed in Northborough. I had learned that they were placed there, but what I didn't learn until 5 weeks ago today was that the Commonwealth was not providing them with food.
The supportive service.
Not
basic
even supportive
food.
service, but not even food at that time. They've
Yep.
since changed their policy.
Sure.
But the Commonwealth made the decision that it was better to have people housed and unfed than unhoused and unfed.
Right.
And so they fairly quickly were
Adjusted. Yeah. Yep.
implemented that. But 5 weeks ago today, I first visited the families in Northborough.
Yep.
And because the system's overwhelmed, it has turned to the towns.
Sure.
As I explained to people, they had no legal obligation to do that. But all 4 of the communities I represent have had, we use the term unsupported people in hotels.
Sure. Yep.
You were out there the first night the families were in Westboro.
Yep.
And from the very basics of baby food and diapers, you know,
Really basic stuff. Yep.
really basic stuff.
Toiletries. Yep.
You know, a toothbrush, shampoo,
Yeah.
you know, just the very, very basics
Sure.
people needed.
Sure.
And the towns of Northborough, Westboro,
Yeah.
Southborough, and the city of Framingham all stepped up, each in
Yes.
their own different ways,
Yep.
to make sure that these families were supported. So you act about a very personal. So the first night in Framingham, we're literally, okay, we now have baby food and diapers.
Sure.
I'm going out buying prescriptions. I rented a room. When I first arrived in Framingham, there were public health nurses there trying to examine families on a picnic table in a parking lot
Right.
on a 90-plus degree day. And
Yeah.
I just,
Yeah.
we can't do this.
Right.
And I was the lead for the, serving meals, not this past week and the weekend before in Framingham. It's like, okay, they need somebody.
Yep. I can do that.
I can do that.
Yeah.
Just this past weekend on, I don't want to call it it was on the more fun side.
Yep.
I was at Southborough there. They do summer nights, and the Middlesex Bank was there, giving out, the kinds of things they give out at these street fairs, balloons and things like that.
Yep.
So I said, I wonder if, all the children in these families, because people have been donating things like chalk and toys and bubbles.
Right.
So I send a message to all the three hotels saying, do any of the kids need these toys?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, we're good here. But the Motel 6 families could use them.
Yeah.
So the Middlesex Bank people were great. They put together 12 tote bags
that's great.
of blow up, beach balls
Yeah.
and everything.
Yep.
And then, so because of the way these things are set up, people are volunteering here and there. I said, if I just leave these in the supply room, they probably won't get to the families.
Yep.
I had the list from the previous week, room numbers, so I just knocked on every door.
There you go.
I couldn't speak the language. I'm trying to show them, this is a balloon you blow
You
up.
blow
This is a
up.
beach ball you blow up.
Yeah.
And then, as it happened, some of the families were able to go to a little picnic that I was invited to. And I'm seeing these kids that 2 hours before were stuck in a Motel 6 with no grass.
Yeah.
And for the first time in like 2 weeks, they were able to be outside on
playing.
grass. And they're playing with
Right.
the Middlesex balloon beach balls.
Yeah.
And there were sunglasses, and there's a 3-year-old, and he's wearing the sunglasses upside down.
I love it. Perfect.
And
I've and we do have to. We'll wrap up here, but I have to say that as I've met some of the families here in Westboro, and I've seen them now in their community, and they've been out shopping. I ran into a family last night at Roach Brothers.
Most of the families don't have the opportunity to do that.
I know, and so they're very fortunate, kind of for
Yeah.
proximity. But I'm like, they just want what I want, right? They want like a safe space. They want their kids to be happy. They want to be able to work, so on and so forth, which is a
when they
whole
wanna
other,
work.
whole
It is a
other
whole
conversation, which we don't have time for today, but maybe another time. Would love to have you back at any point in time. Thank you for the work you're doing.
And thank you for your work, both as a select board member and bringing people to the community through cable TV.
You bet. And the information will be on the screen on how you can contact Representative Donaghue if you have any questions. She's accessible and certainly happy to answer questions and help as she can. Thanks so much for being a part of the audience here and on the 01581 Let's Talk. We'll see you next time.